There are important lessons from what has happened in Libya. The Libyans liberated themselves. Ordinary Libyans from all walks of life came together and showed incredible resilience and bravery as they rose up and drove out Gaddafi. The people of Benghazi, the brave fighters of Misrata, the people of Zawiya, the warriors from the Nafusa Mountains, all of them showed incredible courage in liberating their country. The National Transitional Council, who demonstrated great leadership, not least as Tripoli fell, urged people to avoid reprisals and to look to the future, a message that still holds true today. This revolution truly belongs to the Libyan people. The United Nations played a vital role authorizing international action. But let's be clear, the United Nations is no more effective than the nation-states that come together to enforce its will. And on this occasion, a coalition of nations across the Western and Arab world had the will to act. In doing so, they stopped Benghazi from joining Srebrenica and Rwanda in history's painful roll call of massacres that the world failed to prevent. Today, Tripoli and Benghazi are cities transformed. Where there was fear, now there is hope, and an optimism and a belief that is truly inspiring. But there are challenges ahead, not just in Libya, but all across the region. Economies in the region have underperformed when compared with their peers. In 1960, Egypt's GDP per capita was comparable with Korea's. Today, it has fallen to just around 1/5 of the size. Across the region, some countries dependent on oil revenues, others held back by heavy state control, have failed to diversify and create jobs in productive new sectors, and failed to connect themselves to the economies of the region and the wider world. Indeed, less than 4% of North African trade is within the region, making it the least integrated neighborhood in our world. And the promise of economic reform has not been fulfilled. Too often, people were told economic reform would bring them market economies with greater freedom to start up businesses, to trade, to grow, to create wealth. But it didn't. It brought them corrupt and crony capitalism. Now, the future is for the people of this region to determine. But I would urge them not to reject something they have never had, a genuine, open, fair and transparent market economy which has proved the world over to be the best way to create jobs and wealth. And the need for economic success is vital, because this is a region where 60% of the population is under 25, and youth unemployment is nearly double the world average. It is a region that must create 50 million new jobs by 2020 just to keep pace with its population. That means 700,000 new jobs every year in Egypt alone. And these jobs, they shouldn't just be for men. Let's be honest, it is not just the men of the region who want a job and a voice. The unemployment rate for Egyptian women is more than 3 times that of men. And it's not only the economy they are denied to play the chance to play a fuller role in, it is society and politics and culture too. But look at the crowds in Freedom Square, and we see it is the women too finding their voices, showing clearly they want to play a part in building their future. So in this historic period, when the voice of this region is finally being heard, there is now a unique opportunity for women to fulfill their ambitions too. This is not just in the interests of women, it is in the interests of those countries as a whole. Let us be clear, you cannot build strong economies, open societies, and inclusive political systems if you lock out women. So the Arab Spring will not succeed if the opportunities that are opening up are denied to half of the population. Now, of course, the actions we take to support the people in each country must be tailored to that country, with respect for its particular culture, history, and tradition. What is right for Libya will not necessarily be right for everywhere else. But the international community has found its voice in Libya and we must not now lose our nerve. We must have the confidence to speak out and act as necessary to support those who seek new freedoms. In the European Union, it is time to ensure that the billions of euros we spend in this region each year are used to support reform that will meet the aspirations of the people. And there should be no more excuses for denying the people of the region fair access to our markets, including for agriculture. Here at the UN, we have a responsibility to stand up against regimes that persecute their people. We need to see reform in Yemen, and above all on Syria. It is time for the members of the Security Council to act. We must now adopt a credible resolution threatening tough sanctions. Of course, we should always act with care when it comes to the internal affairs of a sovereign state. But we cannot allow this to be an excuse for indifference in the face of a regime that week after week arrests, intimidates, tortures and kills people who are peacefully trying to make their voices heard. The voice of the African Union is vital too. Africa has rightly challenged the world to meet its aid commitments. I am proud that Britain will meet its commitment to spending 0.7% of gross national income from 2013. And all the countries that made promises at Glen Eagles and elsewhere should meet those promises too. In the case of Britain, it means that we have been able to provide £124 million of emergency aid to 3 million people facing starvation in the Horn of Africa. But at the same time, Africa must meet its responsibilities too. Many will find it hard to understand why countries in southern Africa, which fought so hard to throw off repression themselves, have been so slow to respond to the Arab Spring. Of course, I recognize that many have long been committed to non-intervention. But my argument is that where action is necessary, legal and right, to fail to act is to fail those who need our help. So it is welcome that the African Union is taking steps to recognize the National Transitional Council in Libya, as many African countries had already done. Africa's responsibility now is surely to embrace and support Libya's new, inclusive and democratic future. And this must include ensuring that those wanted for serious crimes are brought to justice and that the wealth stolen from the Libyan people is returned to them. We all have a responsibility to the Palestinians too. A key part of the Arab Spring is the right of Palestinians to have a viable state of their own, living in peace, alongside a safe and secure state of Israel. And I strongly support this. There has been much speculation about what will happen here this week. Let's be clear about one fact. No resolution can, on its own, substitute for the political will necessary to bring peace. Peace will only come when Palestinians and Israelis sit down and talk to each other, make compromises, build trust and agree. So our role must be to support this, to defeat those who embrace violence, to stop the growth of settlements, and to support Palestinians and Israelis alike to make peace. But the opportunity in Libya and elsewhere in the region is not just about achieving a more open society, prosperity, and the building blocks of democracy for their own sake. It is about security too. Some have argued that stability in the Arab world can only be achieved by the tight control of strong authoritarian regimes, and that reform is a threat to stability. In fact, the opposite is true. Reform is the basis of long-term stability. Authoritarianism threatens it. While there is never a justification for resorting to terror, if people's hunger for a job and a voice are denied, there is a real risk that the frustration and the alienation they feel can cause them to be drawn to more violent and extremist responses. That is not just a problem for one region, it is a problem for all of us too. Here in this great city of New York, where 10 years ago people of 90 different nationalities were killed in the most horrific terrorist attack in history, we must recognize that political and economic reform in the Middle East is not just good in its own right, but it is also a key part of how in the end we will defeat al-Qaeda. Of course, we must meet terrorist activity with a strong and resolute security response. Al-Qaeda and its offshoots must know they will have no safe hiding place to plot or recruit young men to train as terrorists. But in the long term, we must defeat not only the terrorists, but the extremist ideology that feeds them. Al-Qaeda's poisonous ideology has thrived on repression. Democracy is what it fears most. People aren't in Tahrir Square in Cairo and Freedom Square in Libya for an Islamist caliphate, but for a job, a voice, and a future. And we must heed their call for their freedom and for the security of us all. Thank you.
On behalf of the General Assembly, I wish to thank the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom.
The Prime Minister there, David Cameron, finishing his first UN General Assembly speech before the gathered delegates there.